Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of Pro Democracy Pod. It's just Mila and I today, but we have a really interesting show for you today. Mila just wrote what would you call it, a paper, which for school as she's studying law, which she published on her Substack, and we're going to be talking about that. It's about Libya and the U.S. NATO intervention in that country in 2011. And we're really excited because, I'm really excited because I thought it was a fantastic read, and I would encourage all of you to go read it after this episode. But I'm gonna show you where to find it right now.
It's just my incredibly difficult last name at .substack.com.
It's not that difficult.
I'm glad that you say that. A lot of people seem to think.
So it's garayeb.substack.com, ending impunity /p/ending impunity. You can just I would also encourage everyone to subscribe to Mila's Substack. She's putting out some interesting things. You put something out today, didn't you?
Yeah, today. Yeah, I did an interview with a teacher about online school, and
that it's a good thing, right?
Yeah, that we need to just bow down to the big tech overlords and let them take us. No, definitely not. Check it out on the Substack.
Yeah.
Some people,
it'd be interesting, like if somebody really wanted to like mess with these highly funded higher ed institutions, just to like record their classes at like Harvard or something, then just put them on YouTube or some other platform, maybe Rockfin, because I mean that's basically what higher ed is becoming right now, is just glorified YouTube seminars. I mean, this is something you've been talking about. It's an area that I'm not really in tune with, but we should talk about that more in the future. Yeah. And actually, we were talking like last week about like what kind of expert or if there's an expert that we could have on our show to talk about Libya. And I asked around to some of my journalist friends, and no one really had an answer. It doesn't seem like there's like a wealth of Libya experts. So if our guests if our audience have any ideas on who we could have, please share them. Because again, actually, before we get into Mila's article, I wanted to just provide like a quick update on what's going on in Libya right now, because again, the elections were delayed. So first, the elections are supposed to be held in November. They were postponed till January 24th. And again, they've been postponed till June. So I'm just going to read over this African News article really quick to just, provide kind of a news hook for the story we're going to be talking about today, which is Mila's story or paper. So Libya is likely to conduct its general elections in June after missing the December deadline to elect its first president since its 2011 ouster and killing of longtime dictator Muammar Gaddafi. Okay, so it's calling him a dictator right off the bat, so we know it's like a little slanted, but it's a pretty newsy article. So I do want to read it. UN Special Advisor on Libya, Stephanie Williams, who has been pursuing this agenda, told the Associated Press late Sunday that it's still very reasonable and possible for the country's 2.8 million voters to cast their ballots by June, in line with the UN brokered 2020 roadmap. The country's inability to hold its first ever presidential election came as a surprise to many, especially international bodies that had put measures to ensure the elections be executed in December. Williams, who led UN efforts to end the latest session of violence in Libya in 2020, said elections are needed in the country to give credibility to the country's institutions. All the institutions are suffering a crisis of legitimacy, she said. I don't see any other exit for Libya other than a peaceful political process. After missing the initial date, Libya's elections board proposed the presidential polls should take place on January 24th, but that could not be considered. So we're going to skip past the background and go to expectations. Libyan lawmakers who met in late December last year to examine the issues that forced a postponement of the presidential elections recommended laying out an applicable roadmap. Williams pleaded with lawmakers who are convening again Monday in the eastern city of Tobruk, I don't know if I'm saying that right, to agree on a, quote, clear time-bound process with a clear horizon and to not create an open-ended process. I mean, the UN has kind of set up a government in Libya for a while now. That's not the only government in Libya, and they're kind of at war with each other. But I think that this is correct, that Libya does need the voices of its people to be heard, and it does need an actual democratic process. I know it kind of sounds weird coming from us, given that we host this show, which is satirically called Pro Democracy Pod. It's been more than a decade now of anarchy in Libya, with warring governments and as you talk about, slave markets and just a human rights disaster. So here's Williams, the UN envoy, or whatever her title is. They have to shoulder a great responsibility right now to respect the will of the Libyans who registered to vote, she said. Libyans want to end this long period of transition that the country has experienced since the events of 2011. Transitions is quite the euphemism. The challenges facing the elections include better disputes over the laws governing the electoral process and occasional infighting among armed groups. Williams, however, did not see the departure of foreign mercenaries as a, quote, prerequisite for the election, saying that holding the ceasefire is the priority. Controversial figures declaring runs for the presidency have further polarized the political scene in recent months. Among them are Hiftar, Prime Minister Abdul Hamid, maybe Mila knows how to pronounce this, Daiba, and Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, the ousted dictator's son and one-time heir apparent. So really quick background on these kind of presidential frontrunners. Iftar is a warlord and a former CIA asset. Prime Minister Abdul Hamid Daiba, he was actually in like Gaddafi's kind of inner circle. He ran like the development institution of the country, and kind of oversaw like the public works projects that they had with government funding, like public housing, electricity, infrastructure projects, that kind of stuff. However, he has been accused of corruption, offering bribes and that kind of thing. And then Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, we can talk about him in a minute, because Mila actually mentions in her paper, alongside Muammar Gaddafi, he was the recipient of an arrest warrant by the International Criminal Court. So let's finish up with this article before we get into Mila's paper. The vote's delay also threatens to open a power vacuum. Lawmakers have argued that the mandate of that guy's government ended on December.
I don't know how to pronounce it either. I think it must be like a North African name, and like their Arabic is so different from like the Levant, so can't help
you. Fair enough. So yeah, he's also this guy whose name we can't pronounce. He's also kind of been the prime minister of like the UN-backed government. And so his mandate supposedly ended on December 24, when the elections were supposed to be. So a legislative committee for the election suggested last month restructuring the interim government to, quote, achieve stability. The UN advisor called on the parliament to focus on delivering the vote rather than appointing a new transitional administration. So, I mean, as we can see, like, it's a pretty confused, muddied process in Libya that's still, not much better than its depths since the 2011 overthrow of Gaddafi, which kind of brings us nicely to your piece, which basically you argue that the United States, NATO, France, the United Kingdom, and the International Criminal Court itself are culpable for war crimes, crimes against humanity in Libya during the intervention in 2011. And one thing I really like about your piece is, we talk a lot about human rights and the weaponization of human rights and how it's kind of like there's an industry around it that is, pretty corrupt and often works in opposition to human rights. But here you kind of like set up this dialectic of human rights versus justice.
It's the Augustinian in me.
Well, you have to explain that because I never studied Augustine. I'm quite the rube. That's where I get my name from. Not kidding. So yeah, I mean, you could just explain that because that's not in your paper, but I think it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, this actually corresponds with a broader debate in international law. I know you're probably familiar with the slogan "No justice, no peace."
Yeah, I heard it at a BLM rally.
Yeah, exactly. And Augustine would kind of dispute that because he kind of thinks like, okay, we're in an imperfect world, so justice isn't possible. So the best thing that we can get is peace, and like that's what we should strive for. And so there's a debate in international law, like whatever, that there's like a tension. Is there a tension between justice and peace? Or I like in this article, I kind of instead of talking about peace, I talk about human rights. But I do think obviously that human rights better flourish, like actual human rights better flourish during peacetime. And so my view is like we need to prevent war as much as possible. And so it kind of corresponds with this no justice, no peace, because the other side of the debate will say, well, no, like we don't actually we're not going to like give you, I mean, it can be taken in two ways. Like either it's like we're not going to give you peace until you give us justice, or it's going to be taken as like we're not going to give you if there's no or that you can't have peace without justice, so you're not really in peacetime. And so I'm kind of playing on that a little bit by talking about this tension between human rights and justice, because the mandate of the International Criminal Court is to end impunity. So there's a sort of thing in international law. There's a sense that motivates international law, and it's a sense of moral urgency, like thinking that someone can't get away with it. So an example that's often used is the Nazi Joseph Mengele did awful things, and a lot of times when people find out that he like got away with it, he was, he died happy in Brazil, he was on the beach chilling for his whole life. There's a sense of repulsion, and people want to see like him punished, right? And so the International Criminal Court is kind of motivated by that urge to see injustice punished. So that's like not necessarily a bad urge. But what I argue is that if you're blinded by that urge, you can actually sacrifice human rights in the process.
Right. Yeah, sort of like the ends not justifying the means.
Well, I think there's a sort of fiction that like and I see this common in a lot of activism where you think like, oh yeah, well, if we achieve this one thing, then it must be compatible with the other goals we want to achieve because both are good. But like politics is all about like juggling with tensions and contradictions. And so I think something I argue, and in the sort of tradition of Augustine, is sometimes you really have to like take the best you can get. That's more what politics is about. Yeah. And I'm not saying vote for, like, not in the way that these Democrats are like vote for Joe Biden, but in the way that like, escalating a conflict, bombing civilians for like, even if there's the end goal of punishing Gaddafi or removing him, even if
Say
that's like,
punching?
yeah, I mean, I guess they
Yeah.
punished him in some way, right? But there was a goal, like the ICC wanted to try him, right?
Right.
And that his son is still on the list.
Oh, is that right? I didn't realize.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
And
fascinating.
yeah, and so there's still an urge, to see him punished. And my argument was, that those kinds of appeals. So like in this intervention, there was two kinds of appeals, and like one of the appeals was like this man must be punished for what he's done, and the other appeal was like we need to protect the Libyan population and protect human rights. And I was saying that like by being blindsided by the first one, you're actually sacrificing the second one,
Right.
especially for vulnerable groups, like particularly Black Libyans, which I
Right.
discuss in the article.
Yeah. So, I mean, you very succinctly put it in the article or in the paper. The intervention in Libya brought about retributive catharsis for certain parties, but it did not only fail to improve Libya's condition, but contributed to damaging it. This suggests that the pursuit of justice against those for whom we wish to, quote, end impunity can easily conflict with the goal of protecting civilians from the crimes the ICC is concerned with prosecuting in the first place. So yeah, I mean, and another thing I really liked about the paper is how you kind of showed how the ICC lended legitimacy to the cause of the rebels and the cause of NATO very quickly after NATO's intervention, right?
Yeah, it was actually unprecedented, the speed that they acted at. And when I was working on this paper, I was speaking with someone who used to be a prosecutor in international criminal law. And he was like, this was very surprising, especially the information they were acting on. And like, this guy's not like an anti-imperialist activist. He's just a law prof, but like, he was saying like, okay, yeah, like this was actually quite surprising. The speed of which this happened, and also just the fact that the ICC in their own documents kind of like admitted, they were saying like, yeah, we know there's atrocities on both sides, but we're only going to focus on one side.
Right.
And again, that also was very emboldening to these groups. It lended a sort of legitimacy, and they committed very heinous acts, like very disturbing, heinous acts. And
rape of Black women, pillaging of villages, and NATO indiscriminately bombing, quote, Gaddafi's strongholds, right? Which are really just like residential areas of people who are, overwhelmingly in support of the government, which is a war crime that you later identify in the piece. So, I mean, and another thing, so, okay, basically NATO intervenes, CIA starts arming, rebels, weapons are making it into
pro-democracy rebels.
I'm sorry?
Pro-democracy rebels, of course.
Pro-democracy Salafists are being armed. And then 2 months later, the ICC issues an arrest warrant for Gaddafi, his intelligence chief, and his son. So, I mean, and again, they note that that there's atrocities being committed on both sides, but at a certain point, Gaddafi called for a ceasefire and agreed to negotiate with NATO. That offer was declined, and the bombing campaign continued. And here in your piece, in addition, NATO targeted Libya's state television and killed 3 civilian journalists, which is against the UN Resolution 1738, banning attacks on journalists. So, I mean, basically, what you do is you show the causality, right, of the both the, I guess, the media campaign, the legal campaign, and the regime change campaign, in creating the human rights disaster, the slave markets, the failed state in Libya that persists to today. And you say that there are 5 war crimes. Could you talk about that?
Yes. So I'm gonna pull up the piece, which I should have done initially, but
I should have
yeah.
shared with you the excerpts that I took from it.
Yeah, so I'm making some allegations, so to speak. But basically, so there's crimes against humanity are defined in the Rome Statute of the ICC. And so there were a few that I discussed. It's not comprehensive or exhaustive, but these are the ones that stood out for me.
Yeah.
And so the 5 crimes that I listed were murder, extermination, enslavement, torture, and persecution. And so I talk about, first of all, the airstrikes that NATO and its allies committed. And again, these were very intense airstrikes. Like this was kind of shocking to the international community. These strikes killed civilians, they killed journalists. Um, and so they were a widespread attack against the civilian population over a broad geographical area. As I say, that's the definition. Um, and as I also note, like this was even admitted by Hillary Clinton's policy director at the time, that there was no attempt to protect civilians on Gaddafi's so-called side. And again, like that tended to be Black Libyans.
Right.
So again, there's this huge high volume of airstrikes. Um,
And you
and
say, note that with respect to causality in criminal law, a
Mhm.
perpetrator is responsible for the consequences of their actions, even if they did not intend to bring about each consequences, if they were reasonably aware that it could occur in the ordinary course of events.
Yes.
And I think that's really important, right?
Yeah, and again, like these are standards that we apply to everyday civilians. So if you go to a bar and you get in a fight and you like punch someone as hard as you can and they die, like there's actually been a case in Canada where someone went to jail because he punched someone in the stomach and the guy ended up dying. And the guy said, well, I didn't expect him to die, but it's like too bad. You're still responsible for that. And so
Right.
we're applying this to ordinary civilians, and yet we can't apply this to a sophisticated military entity. I don't know.
Right.
Bit
Right.
sus. And so, so
World
yeah,
class military,
yeah.
most highly funded in the world. Um,
Hmm. And
so,
so, yeah.
oh, go ahead. No, please.
Oh, so I just said, like, if you're attacking a densely populated civilian area and you're not, like, you've admitted that there's a civilian group that you're not attempting to protect, then you meet the standard of criminal responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is just like a fascinating piece because you kind of you turn the tables so well. You know, holding the International Criminal Court to its own standards. Um, and another thing that you say, some have suggested that regime change was not truly on the table until the United Nations Security Council referred to the case to the ICC because protests against Gaddafi were not initially about removing him from power. And so, when you issue an arrest warrant, you're saying like obviously he can't be president of Libya
Yeah.
and in confinement in the Hague. So
Yeah, and that was a very emboldening move to the rebels again. And so it gives your cause like an air of righteousness.
yeah,
Um and
you
yeah,
also kind of played devil's advocate too and said that like there's an argument that this isn't a direct quote, but there's an argument that like this emboldened Gaddafi to continue his side of the campaign, his side of the
Mhm.
war, because it's like, well, either I win or I go to prison,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just it wasn't in the interest of peace, and that's
Right.
very clear. If you're interested in peace and by extension protecting human rights, like you're not gonna go in with like completely shoddy information
Yeah.
and do something like this. And frankly, like all of these entities would know better because there's a sort of argument that I see comes from like the left sometimes as well, where it's kind of like, oh yeah, like these interventions are so stupid, they don't work, like we're too, like they act like, oh, we're just stumbling upon Libya and making like honest mistakes.
Right.
At best it's like negligent, but I think that these groups of people or these actors that are behind these interventions know, like they should know
Yeah.
that what they're doing is going to cause this kind of unrest. Like they're not
I mean,
stupid.
and that like totally ignores the side of the argument about like why the United States actually viewed Gaddafi as a threat rather than it being like that gives credence to the idea that this was a humanitarian intervention rather than one to remove a rival, right? Not necessarily a rival, but somebody who was not compliant with the U.S. global order, trying to create a Pan-African currency. Basically, um, the crime of all State Department targeted adversaries of using national resources for the benefit of the people. Free electricity, a free car for every household, the highest standard of living in Africa. These things were because uh, of socialized institutions, right?
Yeah.
Of nationalized institutions, and the United States has shown time and time again that privatization or the highway, right?
Yeah. No, exactly. And it's like they might as well have listed that in their crimes against humanity that they're charging Gaddafi with, because
Yeah.
that is essentially what the crime that he committed. I mean, obviously, like I didn't write this essay to actually refute any allegations against him. He may have very well done bad things. I
Right.
don't think it's disputed that he had authoritarian tendencies or whatever. It's not about that. It's more about we have this institution. Its mandate is ending impunity, and yet it doesn't apply its own criminal standards to itself. Like that is,
Or to the United States, or to
yeah,
NATO, or the UK, or France, or
yeah.
the
You got to
rebel
be
groups.
African.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Or Serb.
yeah.
Uh,
True, true. They're very
with that,
special.
I'm gonna end the Twitter live stream. We're gonna continue talking about this piece and more. So we hope to see you guys over on Rockfin. It's rokfin.com/prodempod. And we are now just on Rockfin. So, you know, I really find it fascinating that what you're right, by acknowledging the violence of anti-Gaddafi forces but choosing to prosecute only the other side, the ICC provided a narrative that those resisting Gaddafi were legitimate and justified in whatever actions they took to remove him. This is arguably a form of abetting. Could you explain that?
Yes. So abetting in criminal law, you might have heard the term aiding and abetting. So they're not the same thing, but it is a form of criminal liability or criminal responsibility. So let's say we're hanging out and you're saying like, I'm thinking about robbing a bank, but I don't know. And I go, yeah, man, you should do it. Like, and I help you devise a plan, but I'm like, I'm kind of not really helping you. I'm just kind of saying like, oh yeah, and you should do it like that. Or like, oh, think of all
Right.
the
You're
money
not my
you're gonna get.
driver.
Yeah, I'm not your driver. That would be the aider. But
Right.
like, let's say I'm helping, like I'm encouraging you. I can still be liable for that offense, right? So, some legal advice for you all out there, by the way, don't encourage your friends to commit crimes. Or at least call me first.
I thought we were supposed to be gay and do crimes.
Yeah,
I
don't
thought this
say
was a free
that. You
country.
might be charged with abetting. So my point was that the ICC is kind of doing that by, they're saying like, we know you're doing terrible things, but we're only going to go after this one, the person you're fighting against. To me, that seemed like a form of moral encouragement. And so I think it could be, you could make the argument that they are engaging and abetting the rebels, who again did some pretty messed up things.
So I mean, like, okay, so obviously Gaddafi was like never able to go to trial, right? He was filmed being pulled out of a convoy of vehicles by rebels with NATO air cover, and then sodomized to death with a bayonet.
Mm-hmm.
So that didn't happen. He never went to trial. But if he had gone to trial, is it like, can you raise as a defense, like, yeah, I did bad things, however, like, the other side also did? Is that any kind of defense? I mean, how could there, what would be the roadmap for getting like rebels prosecuted? Is there one?
It is more difficult because we don't really, like, I mean, I don't know. I haven't seen, like, it's not common to see non I don't think it's common to see that.
Yeah.
They're non-state entities. I do think that even if the ICC would have acknowledged, like, the complexity of the conflict at the very least, and not treated it, because the way that they framed it was like, we have these people, like, yes, they've done bad things, but they've essentially sided with their cause. And
Yeah.
I don't know if that would provide Gaddafi with defenses if some of the allegations are true. Unless, you could argue like, oh no, this violence was in the context of battle, and I wasn't specifically targeting a kind of population that I wasn't allowed to target. But yeah, that's kind of like a separate
That's separate from what you cover.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and you said too that like the ICC prosecutors have a lot of discretion in what they pursue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they do. And so it's not like, again, like, it's not like, oh, like when you're a prosecutor, like, you should know that because you're granted such great discretion, you have a lot of responsibility. So this was actually, with that considered, even more careless
Yeah.
than it would be if, like, there was more rigid restrictions around what they can do.
Right. Well, and the thing is that we know that the ICC, and I can say this, maybe you can't say this, or you couldn't say it in your paper at least, but we know that the ICC is kind of like an extension of empire, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there was the whole thing with John Bolton, right? What was that mess? It was over Israel, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I mean, I know there's a lot of
Yeah, so Bolton
stuff
threatened
there.
to sanction the ICC. This is funny.
Yes, yeah.
Right, it was Afghanistan because the ICC was considering the prosecution of U.S. troops over the abuse of detainees in Afghanistan, and like, so, but like I don't think the U.S. has ever been prosecuted at the ICC, right?
No, actually, the only ones, like, it's you really got to be African for the most part, or
Yeah,
Serb, but like you
right.
said, but it's unusual otherwise. It is definitely an extension. And that's kind of the funny thing, is like the US tends to try to portray international institutions as working against them.
Right.
Whether that's the UN or
Republicans more so, but yeah.
yeah, and it's just not the case. So for instance, there's a common complaint that, for instance, the UN has like so many resolutions against Israel, but then like not against like some other countries.
Sure.
And it's like, but these other countries aren't claiming the credentials that Israel's claiming. Like, they're
Right.
not claiming to be a democracy, but and there's also the fact that, like, they're doing these resolutions which don't do anything at all because they can't take any real action.
They have no teeth. Yeah.
And yeah, exactly. And so when you look at it that way, like, they really are, an arm of empire. It's not even, I don't even think it's controversial to say that. And like when I was in my seminar for international criminal law, it wasn't very controversial to
Well,
say.
look. I mean, like the U.S. invaded Iraq over false reports of weapons of mass destruction. They dropped white phosphorus on Fallujah. I mean, in Iraq and Afghanistan, you've had British war crimes, U.S. war crimes. Think about the collateral murder video where the U.S. Killed 2 Reuters journalists, unprosecuted by the ICC. You've had Australia. I'm sure Canada has probably done war crimes as well. So it's not difficult to see how it's an extension of empire, and this is really kind of par for the course for these international bodies, where like you have the IMF or the World Bank or things of that nature, financial institutions, or the ICC, a legal institution that are kind of just like set up with most of their backing coming from the United States. So of course it serves those ends. But I wouldn't be surprised to see the ICC going after China at some point.
Oh yeah,
if they haven't already. But my question, so maybe you know the answer, maybe you don't. If the ICC issues an arrest warrant, who is supposed to execute that warrant?
Yeah, so it's there's a huge problem in international law with enforceability.
Yeah.
So it's like that is a thing, right? Like, if Gaddafi didn't leave let's say he stayed there was nothing, and he didn't leave the country at all.
Yeah.
There was no one to forcibly extradite him. I don't think that he would have even, stood trial. I mean, his son has not.
That's what I was gonna. Yeah, that's what I was kind of getting at, because his son is maybe he's got a security team, but he's not exactly hard to find, right? He's a front runner in the Libyan elections, and there's an active arrest warrant against him by the ICC. So it seems like the ICC has no teeth other than it's like propaganda, right?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, and that's kind of what I was trying to touch on in my piece. Is their function is almost like morale, like they and legitimacy, right? Like it's really about they provide a justification. If they're on your side, you're on the side of righteousness and justice, and
Right.
because again, it's all about accountability. It's like ending impunity, right? It's all about, naming and shaming, and like, there's like international cancel culture.
Right. Yeah. That's funny. Yeah. Well, I mean, like I was saying earlier, we talk about like the canard of human rights, but we don't really. There's not a lot of discussion about the use of justice in that same way towards those same means of regime change. So I'm really glad that you published this publicly, because it touches on a lot of issues that I think have been kind of glossed over. And I actually really look forward to you like continuing to apply like a legal lens on international affairs, because that's really lacking. We talk a little bit about sovereignty, but it's in a very kind of what's the word I'm looking for? It's a general sense of the word, where it's kind of vague and it doesn't mean a whole lot, but you're able to bring the receipts of like, this is the statute that says that this is legal.
Oh no, yeah, you got some lawyer brain. Yeah, no, I mean, one other thing that I mentioned in the piece as well is that like the standards of criminal responsibility in the ICC are very similar to the standards that we have in Canadian law, and I'm sure very similar to the standards that we have, or that you have in the US. And the thing is like, even, even if you throw the abetting thing out, if you join another party to an offense, then you become part of that offense. And so that was
Right.
kind of like the sort of last point I was hoping to hammer home, is like,
Sure.
if you want to keep using the bank analogy, like let's say your friends are robbing a bank, and like they call you to pick you up. You didn't know anything about the bank plan. You didn't know they had just robbed it, but like they come and pick you up and they say, we just robbed a bank, we're getting in the car right now, and you keep driving, and then you're part of the offense now. Like that's how it goes, right? And so similarly, it's not just the ICC, but like all of these groups, like the US, the UK, France, NATO, they willingly joined a party to these egregious offenses, namely the rebels. And so they cannot escape responsibility for that. And they keep continuously doing this, not just in Libya, but, you know, if you look at Syria as another great example, where you see like these groups that are backed by the US, they're not, it's just crazy to me that they're able to escape criminal responsibility for, you know, the actions of the parties that they willingly join and support.
And this goes back to the 80s. It started with Afghanistan, and then it was Bosnia, and then it was Syria and Libya, and more recently it was Azerbaijan in the Azerbaijan-Armenia conflict. And we're kind of seeing the same thing in Africa and in Ethiopia right now. A lot of the same dynamics at play, and you know, that's a topic that might be for another show, because we haven't really touched on it, and I have to admit I'm not well versed on the subject. But a cursory look kind of shows the playbook in play, right? And it's the same kind of thing. And you're right, it's criminal that it hasn't been punished. So again, Mila, awesome paper. I think it's well, I look forward to your future contributions to the discourse, you know, because there's not a lot of legal analysis on this. But I think that'll do it for today, unless you had more to add.
No, it's basically it. I'm thankful that like a bunch of people read this. It got a lot of like numbers after that viral Clinton tweet I did. And
which was that? Let's pull it up.
I did the thing that I hate doing, namely quote tweeting politicians.
Oh yeah.
But I was really annoyed because something I've noticed, especially after writing this paper, is like it is just even more disgusting to me to see the US Democrats talk their anti-racism talk, because like they are responsible for like, again, like heinous anti-Black crimes in Libya. Things that, you know, they like it's something that like is just not even like up for
and it's unfathomable by the standards of racial justice in the United States or Canada.
It's like, not a microaggression. It's
right.
Like,
it's not even like a lone lynching, right? I mean, as awful as that is, like think about like Emmett Till and or you know, Walter what was his name? You know, any of these cases where like, you know, you have these extremely egregious cases of, you know, like a Black man running away from the cops and executed from behind, or just like the most blatant example you can think of in recent years of a police execution of a Black man unarmed. You know, it pales in comparison to what happened system-wide in Libya, where you have an actual industry of human slavery. We haven't seen that kind of racial injustice since before the Civil War, right?
Yeah, and again, it's like it is really horrific to see these American Democrats go off about slavery and racism and all this, when it's like these are crimes that you've still not faced responsibility for.
Yeah.
And so, here I said Hillary Clinton actively sided with extremist militants that tortured Black Libyans and cleansed their villages. She laughed while the leader of the most prosperous African country was sodomized and slave markets returned. This is the state of liberal American anti-racism. And kind of that's what I mean. Like, it's like, this is, you know, there's an anti-racism industry, like industry in the US. for the
Absolutely.
Democrats, and like it relies on them pontificating about how, they're so enlightened and the Republicans are so bigoted.
Yeah.
And like I'm like, it doesn't get any more racist than this. Like this
Right.
this
Yeah, I
is
mean, at least the Republicans are open about being bastards, right? I mean,
mhm,
and it's the same thing with Debbie Wasserman Schultz, right? Who was like pushing tipping the scales towards Hillary during the 2016 election. Um, and I think we talked about this on our last show, is how on January 6th, the day that, supposedly democracy was attacked by insurrectionists, the anniversary, Debbie Wasserman Schultz tweeted her support, reaffirmed her support on Twitter for Juan Guaido. And, the United States has sent mercenaries, former special forces into Venezuela, armed with, you know, a large number of assault rifles, um, to overthrow the government, to stage an insurrection. So it just, there's no party that's more hypocritical, I don't think, in the world than the Democrats. I'm going kind of viral on Twitter right now, um, for talking about all these fascistic measures that the Democrats support against unvaccinated people, internment camps, fining them, um, putting
mhm.
them in prison for their social media posts, taking their children away. Um, and this is the same party that, voted out fascism in 2020. That was their main talking point. And now, they're like full on with fascism.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah,
par for the course, you
it's
know?
unreal. And like these are supposed to be the lesser of two evils. I
Right.
still never understand that. But that's yeah, like that's it kind of blows my mind. It's funny because I was last night I was showing Alex how I've got so many texts from my government being like, get a booster shot
Yeah.
right now. And I'm like, okay, let's cool it. But I'll show like this is like my government is texting me like the way that like a thirsty guy would text me.
You should
Um,
like text them back with that meme from Mean Girls, like,
why
why
are you
are you
so
so
obsessed
obsessed
with
with me?
me? It's
Yeah.
actually insane how many like texts there are. Um, but yeah, it's like, Mila, you can now book your appointment. And I'm like, and then I just don't answer. Mila, don't forget to book your appointment, and there's just so many. Like they just keep going off.
Are you
Just
doxing your government right now? No, I'm
yeah,
kidding.
I'm doxing them. But like look at that. Like it's
Yeah.
wow. Like calm down. But yeah, no, that's like not to bring things back to the pandemic, but it's just like, this is this is how it is. So
The new normal. Yeah.
yeah.
So actually, before we go, you were telling me that your professor was a prosecutor at the ICC. Is that right?
He prosecuted the Yugoslavian, like he was part of the Yugoslavian tribunals.
Yeah.
Really nice guy. I have been like a little Yugoslavia pilled by a friend of the pod, Sam from Twinkrev, who has
Yeah.
like really challenged the narrative as someone who has family from Slovenia. Um, but so yeah, I mean, I didn't challenge my prof on this at all, but I was saying like, I did the paper went well. He like didn't disagree with a lot of my points, and like that just goes to show that like what I'm saying is not that controversial. And like it's kind of stunning to me that like, it can be blatantly admitted by the legal and the international legal community. Everybody kind of like it's hard to dispute these things.
Yeah.
But we're just kind of being like, well, oh well, we can't do anything. Like it's
Yeah.
done. It's the same how like you have Tony Blair being like knighted,
Yeah.
It's just it's that's
What happened
how
to our democracy awards? Remember we
yeah,
were
I
doing
know.
we
We should
just kind of
reinstate
forgot
that.
about that, but
Yeah.
we
We'll
should
give
we
it to
should give one
Tony
to,
Blair.
yeah, Tony Blair. Yeah.
I went on RT to talk about that. So
Did you?
yeah, if you guys are interested, check it out. It talked about how Tony Blair should be in prison.
Yeah.
Look at me just being like, all these people should be in prison. This article, I'm like, all these people should be tried for this.
It's not hard to make these kinds of arguments, right?
I'm
There's like
such a
ample
carceral
evidence.
feminist, as they say.
One more time. I'm sorry, Mila. One more time.
I said I'm such a carceral feminist, as they say. You know, like that accusation.
Yeah.
But
Well, I was saying it's not hard to make these arguments, right? It's just that no one's listening. I mean, people are listening on social media and whatnot, platforms like Rockfin and YouTube and everything like that, Substack, and a handful of outlets, but we have no power, right? And in some circumstances, like with Julian Assange, you expose war crimes by Western powers, and then you are sentenced to rot in prison for the rest of your life. So it's, again, I'm so thankful that we have like a legal lens on these kinds of things from you. Not to puff you up too much, but thanks for your work here. And I also want to thank our Rockfin viewer, Fred Dean, who said, I learned so much listening. Thanks. And give us a $5 tip. So thank you, Fred. And again, if anyone watching has a recommendation for a guest on Libya, I'd love to hear it. We'll see if the June elections are postponed for a third time. But at some point, I'd like to cover the Libyan elections on the show.
Yeah, that could be fun.
And maybe later this week we're gonna have another show because we're a little behind on our 1 week schedule. And I really want to get back into the pandemic discourse because I feel like this is like the primary contradiction of our day. We're really like in a new era of world affairs. It's not, I spent the past like 5 years or so saying it's not the war on terror era anymore. It's great power competition. And now I feel like we've gone past great power competition and into something new. And it's just not being examined it's not being adequately examined. I'll say that because unfortunately the left has kind of given up this issue, ceded it to the right, and I don't think the analysis is always as good as it could be, although I will say that you learn a lot more reading right-wing papers these days.
Yeah, that's concerning, huh?
I know, right? Well, and I felt the same way with Russiagate, but now it's like it's here, it's domestic, so it's more concerning because I mean, yeah, you would learn a lot more about Russiagate reading right-wing papers, but this is at home, and it's so scary. And I really want to talk about it more. So we're going to be looking to do more of that on the show. Thank you for joining us, everyone. I hope that you are having a nice week. Hug your friends and family with 3 masks on, and 3 boosters in your blood.
4 now, actually. The CEO of Pfizer needs another yacht.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you remember? Before we go, real quick, one of my favorite Trump moments, one of the last good ones since he was blacklisted from the discourse via bans on social media and blackouts on most mainstream outlets. Isn't that weird how we don't cover the former president on like CNN or MSNBC anymore? Anyways, one of my last favorite moments was when he was debating Joe Biden and he was saying, this guy wears the biggest mask I've ever seen. So everyone make sure to wear a big mask.
Yeah.
Like Biden,
someone at my
follow the science.
I have to say one more horrifying thing. This person at my school, I had a town hall today for my school about like returning in person, and somebody said that there should be academic discipline for people who don't follow the mask mandates properly.
Oh my God.
I know, like it's a lot. No
Yeah,
one's allowed to
Mila's in
eat
the
in
thick of
class.
it.
Yeah, I am in like, you know,
I'm in like a small town in
pray
Mexico
for
where I
me.
have like more dogs and horses and cows than humans in my town. So I'm largely insulated from the chaos until I log on Twitter.
Yeah,
But
that's
Mila's like right in the thick of it. She's in a big city, going to a large university, town
mhm.
halls to decide the future of um, of the education that you're paying. I'm guessing tens of thousands of dollars for.
No,
Um,
that's so American. Oh my God.
okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah, no, American law schools are insane. No, but it is still like we are returning in person next week and it's really great, but there is definitely, like there's some pretty crazy things going on. Like there's people really calling for kind of authoritarian policies. Our gyms just reopened in BC, which is very nice because I was having a meltdown. So
For you.
so yeah,
I'm gonna
everyone
pass on the gyms, but
pray for me.
all
Knock
right,
on
everyone. Are
wood.
you
All right.
good?
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Well, I was gonna end the show like 20 minutes ago, and
I
then we just
know. This is
started
like
ripping at
when
the point.
Arabs get together and then they stand at the door for like 10 years. That's like, yeah.
All right, very good. Thanks for joining us, guys. We will hopefully see you later this week, if not early next week, talking about the pandemic, talking about more of the craziness going on,
Mhm.
and enjoy.